We're moving towards a more dynamic, data-driven approach, Russell. The board feels we need a paradigm shift in leadership to leverage our assets in the new global economy. The words slid out of Julian Croft's mouth like they were coated in oil. He was 34 years old, with a Wharton MBA, a silver Rolex that cost more than my first house, and the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from a life without consequences. He sat across the polished mahogany table of the boardroom, the skyline of Galveston a glittering backdrop to my execution. Next to him, Blake Simmons, his college roommate and my designated replacement, offered a weak, smug smile. Blake looked like he'd have trouble managing a fantasy football team, let alone the fifth busiest port in the United States. My name is Russell Harmon. I'm 57 years old. For 31 years, I was the Port Operations Director for the Galveston Port Authority. I didn't just have the job, I had built the job. I designed the systems, negotiated the contracts, and knew every single pilot, union steward, and shipping captain from Houston to Hamburg on a first-name basis. The $890 million in annual commerce that flowed through our channels wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet to me. It was the result of 3 decades of handshakes, 3 a.m. phone calls during hurricanes, and a level of institutional knowledge that couldn't be taught in a business school. Julian continued his jargon-filled eulogy for my career. Blake here has an impressive background in logistics optimization and will be spearheading our digital transformation. Blake's resume said he'd spent 2 years at a tech startup that sold scheduling software to dentists. I'm sure the Port of Galveston, with its 22 major international shipping contracts and constant dance of 1,000-foot-long container ships, was exactly the same. My hands rested on the table, calm. My knuckles weren't white. My breathing was even. 31 years of dealing with storms at sea and on land teaches you to hold steady in the face of chaos. This was just another storm, smaller than most. Your service has been appreciated, of course, Julian added, a dismissive wave of his hand. We've put together a severance package. Standard. HR will walk you through it. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. That was the final insult. The implication that I, the man who held the master keys to every facility on the property, was now a security risk. But here's what Julian Croft, with his perfect hair and his complete ignorance, didn't know. He thought the port ran on his new data-driven, synergistic, digitally transformed vision. He was wrong. The port ran on paper. Thick, dense stacks of paper signed in 1992, filed in steel cabinets, and underwritten by a legal authority he had never once bothered to investigate. And my name was on all of it. If you appreciate stories about the quiet, methodical people who actually make the world work, getting the last word against arrogant suits who think they know better, hit that like button and subscribe right now. I promise you, the cargo in this story is pure satisfaction, and you're going to want to be here when it comes into dock. I started on these docks in 1988. I wasn't a director then. I was a 26-year-old kid with a master mariner's license for unlimited tonnage and a busted knee that had ended my career at sea. I traded the bridge of a supertanker for a clipboard and a hard hat, working as a stevedore supervisor. Back then, the Port of Galveston was a shadow of its former self. Hurricane Alicia had wrecked the place a few years earlier, and the oil bust of the 80s had nearly finished it off. We were losing business to Houston and New Orleans. The ships that did come were smaller, the contracts less lucrative. Morale was in the gutter. I didn't have a business degree. I had a practical education, forged in the North Atlantic. I knew how ships moved, what they needed, and what their captains worried about at night. I saw inefficiencies everywhere. I saw ships waiting hours for a pilot, cargo sitting on the dock waiting for clearance, and communication breakdowns that cost thousands of dollars a minute. I started making suggestions. I designed a new scheduling board on a massive chalkboard, a simple analog system that cut docking times by 15%. I started talking to the union guys, not as a boss, but as someone who'd done hard labor. I learned their concerns, their grievances, and earned their trust. The port director at the time was a man named Captain Angus McGregor, a crusty old Scotsman who had forgotten more about the sea than most people ever learn. He saw what I was doing. He pulled me out of the yard and into the office. Harmon, he'd grumbled. Quote 5. Over the next 10 years, he taught me the other side of the business, the contracts, the politics, the money. I became his protege, his operations chief, and when he retired in 1999, I took his chair. My life became the port. I missed my son's fourth-grade play because a tanker from Saudi Arabia had an engine fire and needed an emergency berth. I spent my 15th wedding anniversary on the phone with a fleet admiral from Maersk, personally convincing him to reroute 3 of his biggest ships to us instead of Houston after Hurricane Ike had scrambled the entire Gulf Coast. My wife Sarah understood. She knew the port wasn't just my job. It was my legacy. It was the institution that put our son through law school and built the life we had. I poured 31 years of my soul into those docks. The result was a logistical masterpiece, a port that ran with the precision of a Swiss watch, handling nearly $1 billion in commerce a year. That was my value. It was a value built on loyalty, sweat, and expertise. 3 things that never appeared on the balance sheets Julian Croft studied so intently. Julian arrived 6 months before my termination. He was the son of a major investor who sat on the Port Authority's board. His appointment as the new chairman was a classic case of nepotism, dressed up as a bold new vision. From day one, he walked around with an air of detached superiority, speaking in a language of buzzwords and acronyms that meant nothing in the real world of tides and tonnage. He saw my experience not as an asset, but as a liability. I was old infrastructure. My methods were analog. My relationships were unquantifiable. He couldn't assign a key performance indicator to a handshake, so he deemed it worthless. The breaking point came in February 2020. He brought in a team of consultants, all of them looking like they'd just stepped out of a catalog, to analyze our operations. They spent 2 weeks in conference rooms, never once setting foot on a working pier. Their final report recommended a complete overhaul, centered around a new proprietary software suite, coincidentally sold by a company in which Julian's father had a significant stake. The report concluded that the port could improve efficiency by 35% by eliminating, quote, 9, quote, which was a clinical, bloodless term for my entire career. Blake Simmons, the 10 expert, was brought in a month later. The writing wasn't just on the wall, it was in a 120-page, full-color, professionally bound report. But the foundation of their entire plan, the bedrock upon which their new digital kingdom was to be built, rested on a fatal oversight. It rested on something that happened in a smoke-filled office on a rainy Tuesday in November 1992. That was the year we almost went under. The port's credit rating was junk. We were leveraged to the hilt, and our insurance underwriters were threatening to drop us. We had a chance to land a massive 25-year exclusive contract with a consortium of European shipping lines, a deal that would save the port. But they were nervous. They needed a guarantee that went beyond the Port Authority's shaky finances. They needed an ironclad assurance that their ships would have priority docking, guaranteed pilotage, and operational security, no matter what happened to the port's balance sheet. I was in McGregor's office. The rain was lashing against the windows. He looked exhausted. "They won't sign, Russell," he said, rubbing his temples. "Their lawyers are saying we're too much of a risk. They need a personal guarantor, someone with a vested maritime authority that exists outside the port's corporate structure." His eyes landed on my license, framed on the wall. The Master Mariner, unlimited tonnage. The highest qualification a seaman can get. It gave me the legal standing to captain any vessel, of any size, in any ocean in the world. It also came with immense personal liability. "The consortium's lawyers proposed the solution," McGregor said, pushing a thick document across his desk. "They want the core operational clauses of the agreement to be underwritten not by the Port Authority, but by a licensed master mariner, personally. They want your signature, your license number, right here in Section 12B. I hesitated. This was unprecedented. "Angus, if something goes wrong, I'm on the hook. They could come after me for everything." "I know, son," he said, his voice quiet. "It's a hell of a thing to ask. But this deal is the only thing keeping the lights on. If we land this, others will follow. It will save us." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Sign it under your name, under your license. We'll draft a separate agreement, an indemnity from the port to you. And once we're stable, in a few years, we'll go through the process of formally transferring the authority back to the port." I trusted him. I believed in the port. I signed it. My signature, Russell Harmon, and my license number, 774A 1988, became the legal linchpin of our most important contract. And as McGregor predicted, once that deal was signed, others followed. Over the next 5 years, I personally underwrote 21 more long-term agreements with the world's largest shipping companies. Each one contained the same language in Section 12B, naming me, Russell Harmon, as the, quote, 19, whose license guaranteed the contract. We got the indemnity agreement, sure, but we never transferred the authority back. The port stabilized, then prospered. It became one of those things that was just forgotten. It was administrative bedrock, buried under years of success. McGregor retired. New board members came and went. The steel filing cabinet in the corner of my office held the original copies, and nobody ever thought to look. Nobody in a position of power, that is. I knew. Every year, when I renewed my license, I thought about it. It was my secret weapon, a sleeping giant I hoped I'd never have to wake, until Julian Croft decided I was obsolete. My son Thomas is a contract lawyer in Houston. He's sharp, methodical, and has a healthy distrust for corporate arrogance. When I got home after my termination, I didn't tell Sarah right away. I went to my study, poured a glass of bourbon, and called Thomas. I explained the situation, calmly and precisely. I told him about the meeting, about Julian and Blake. Then I told him about Section 12B. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Dad," he said finally, his voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Are you telling me that you are the personal legal guarantor for the port's primary revenue streams?" "That's about the size of it," I said, taking a sip of bourbon. "And they just fired you?" "Effective immediately. Security escort and everything." I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "Okay," he said, his tone shifting from son to lawyer. "Don't talk to anyone from the Port Authority. Don't answer their calls. Don't sign anything. I'm driving down tonight. We need to see the originals." That evening, we sat at my dining room table, the 22 thick, leather-bound contracts spread out before us. Thomas read Section 12B in the first one, then the second, then the fifth. A slow smile spread across his face. "This is better than I thought," he said. "The language is airtight. It explicitly states that the agreement is contingent upon the continued validation by the designated maritime authority. That's you. It doesn't say, or his successor. It doesn't say, an employee of the Port Authority. It says, Russell Harmon, license number 774A 1988. "So what does that mean in practice?" I asked. "It means that the moment they terminated your employment, they voided their own contracts. All 22 of them. Right now, the Port of Galveston is in massive breach of contract with every single one of its major clients." While we were planning, Julian and Blake were celebrating. I heard through the grapevine, the docks have ears everywhere, that they'd had a catered dinner for the senior staff in the boardroom. Julian gave a speech about the new era of efficiency and toasted to the future. They sent out a press release filled with meaningless corporate platitudes announcing Blake's appointment. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their brilliant coup that they didn't bother to do the one thing they should have done: read the agreements that generated 95% of their revenue. Their arrogance gave us the opening we needed. The first test came 3 days after my firing. A call came through on my personal cell phone. It was from Klaus Richter, the fleet operations director for Hapag-Lloyd in Hamburg, a man I'd shared more than a few beers with over the years. "Russell," he said, his German accent thick with confusion, "I have a strange email here from your replacement, a Mr. Blake Simmons. He is trying to alter the arrival schedule for the Hamburg Express. This is not the protocol. Are you on holiday?" This was the moment of truth. I chose my words carefully. "Klaus, good to hear from you. No, I'm not on holiday. My employment with the Port Authority was terminated 3 days ago. I am no longer their director of operations." There was a stunned silence. "They fired you? Russell, that is insane. You are the Port of Galveston." "The new chairman has a different vision," I said evenly. "Klaus, I have to inform you, as a matter of professional courtesy and legal necessity, that as of my termination, I can no longer serve as the designated maritime authority for your docking agreement." I heard a sharp intake of breath. Klaus was a shipping man, but he was also German. He understood contracts. Section 12B, he whispered. Mein Gott. The board will hear of this immediately. Thank you, Russell. This is problematic. That was the first domino. I didn't have to push anymore. The system I had built, the relationships I had cultivated, did the work for me. Klaus called his legal department. His legal department flagged the contract. The Hamburg Express, a 900-foot container ship carrying 8,000 TEUs of German automobiles and machinery, was instructed by its lawyers not to enter the Galveston Channel until the contractual authority could be clarified. The ship dropped anchor 5 miles offshore. The next day, 2 more ships, one from COSCO, one from Maersk, joined it. They sat there, massive steel islands on the horizon, burning thousands of dollars an hour in fuel and demurrage fees. Blake Simmons, the logistics optimizer, was apparently baffled. I heard he thought it was a glitch in the pilot scheduling software. He spent a full day on the phone with tech support. Julian Croft, meanwhile, was reportedly in meetings with architects, discussing a redesign of the executive offices. By the end of the first week, the fleet of anchored ships had grown to 12. The local news started running stories. The cost was escalating into the millions per day. Trucking companies had nothing to pick up. The longshoremen had no ships to unload. The economic engine of the entire region was grinding to a halt because 2 arrogant fools had failed to do their homework. The emergency they created was my stage, and I was just waiting for my cue. The call came 10 days after my firing. It was from an old board member, a man named Arthur Vance, who had been there since the McGregor days. His voice was strained. I said calmly. He snapped, though there was more desperation than anger in his voice. He said, "The next morning, I didn't wear a suit. I wore the same navy blue jacket with the Port Authority patch on the chest that I'd worn for 20 years. It was clean, pressed, but it was workwear. I wanted to remind them of who I was and what I did." Thomas, in a perfectly tailored suit, walked beside me, carrying a single, slim briefcase. We walked into the boardroom at 9:05 a.m. Julian was at the head of the table, sweating, trying to explain a PowerPoint presentation filled with meaningless charts and graphs. Blake sat beside him, pale and silent. The air in the room was thick with tension and the smell of expensive, failing cologne. Julian stopped mid-sentence as we entered. His face, a mask of professional confidence just moments before, tightened with fury and a flicker of fear. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Harmon, you are no longer an employee. You're trespassing." I ignored him. I looked at Arthur Vance, who gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Thomas and I walked to the table. He opened his briefcase and began placing a single, leather-bound folder in front of each of the 9 board members. He did it with a quiet, deliberate ceremony that commanded the room's attention. Julian sputtered. "Quote 52, quote 53, Arthur Vance said, his voice like gravel. He didn't raise it, but it cut through Julian's panic like a hot knife. Julian, shocked into silence, slowly sank back into his chair. Inside each folder was a copy of the original 1992 Hapag-Lloyd agreement. A single sentence in Section 12B was highlighted in yellow. This agreement shall be guaranteed and its operational clauses validated by the designated maritime authority, Russell Harmon, holder of U.S. Merchant Mariner License number 774A1988. A low murmur went through the room as the board members read the line. The older ones, like Arthur, who remembered the lean years, understood instantly. Their faces were grim. The newer ones looked confused, then horrified, as the implication dawned on them. Julian snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it frantically. The color drained from his face. He looked from the paper to me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish pulled from the water. He had built his entire strategy on a foundation of data, but he'd been undone by a single, 30-year-old sentence on a piece of paper he'd never bothered to read. The power in the room shifted. It was a tangible thing, moving away from the head of the table, where the Wharton MBA sat in his expensive suit, and settling on me, the terminated employee in the old work jacket. The room was utterly silent, waiting. I finally spoke. My voice was level, calm. the voice I used to talk down panicked captains in a hurricane. I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board. I let the weight of that statement settle into the room. It was a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe, and every single person in that room knew it. I continued. I nodded to Thomas. My son stood up. 59, he announced, his voice crisp and professional. He paused, letting the suspense build. Julian looked like he was going to be physically ill. Thomas said. A few board members nodded. Julian's father, a portly man named Robert Croft, turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before. Thomas continued, his voice ringing with clarity. He let the number hang in the air. The room erupted. Gasps, curses. Robert Croft shot to his feet. Thomas didn't flinch. Sir, with all due respect, it is the opposite of extortion. It is a bill. A bill for services rendered and liability assumed over 3 decades, which your son's reckless actions have just brought due. If you prefer, we can decline the fee, and my father can open negotiations directly with the shipping lines to manage their contracts at another port. I hear Houston is lovely this time of year. That was the kill shot. The threat of losing the contracts entirely, of watching $890 million in commerce sail up the coast to our biggest rival, was enough to silence all opposition. The fight went out of Robert Croft. He collapsed back into his chair, a defeated old man. Arthur Vance took control. All in favor of accepting Mr. Harmon's terms? He asked. 8 hands went up. Robert Croft abstained, staring blankly at the mahogany table. The motion carries, Arthur declared. Julian, Blake, you are terminated. Please have security escort these men from the building. The irony was so thick you could taste it. Julian was a ghost. He stood up, knocking over his chair. He didn't look at me. He looked at his father, a pleading, desperate look that was met with a cold, unforgiving stare. He was escorted out, the architect of a new digital era made obsolete by a piece of paper. Blake Simmons scurried out after him, a forgotten footnote in a story he never understood. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Julian Croft became a pariah in the maritime world. The story of his catastrophic failure, of being outmaneuvered by the, quote, 71 he so casually dismissed, spread through the industry like wildfire. His father's influence couldn't save him. Last I heard, he was selling high-end condos in Miami, a job where his smooth talk and expensive suits were better appreciated. Blake vanished completely, returning to the obscurity from which he came. The Port Authority cut the $45 million check that afternoon. My son and I deposited it the next morning. The board offered me my old job back, with a hefty raise and a seat on the board itself. I politely declined. My time was done. I did, however, agree to stay on for 90 days as a special consultant to oversee the license transfer and to train my replacement. My fee was $10,000 a day. They paid it without complaint. I chose my successor personally, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Flores, who had started as a dispatcher 15 years prior. She knew the port inside and out. She knew the people. She was the future. As for me, I retired. For real this time. Sarah and I bought a 48-foot trawler, nothing too fancy, but comfortable and seaworthy. We spent the first year cruising the Gulf, from the Keys to the Yucatan. There were no 3 a.m. calls, no contract disputes, no boardroom battles. Just the sun, the sea, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. I was finally present for my family, for myself. The stress that had been a constant companion for 31 years melted away, replaced by a deep, abiding calm. Sometimes, on a clear day, I'll anchor my boat in the channel and watch the great ships glide by on their way into the port of Galveston. I see the Hamburg Express or the Costco Pride, and I feel a sense of profound ownership, not of the ships or the cargo, but of the silent, orderly dance they perform. It's a dance I choreographed, a system I built and protected. They thought a fancy degree and a few buzzwords were more valuable than 31 years of calloused hands and hard-won trust. They measured my worth on a spreadsheet and found it lacking. But they learned that the most critical assets can't always be quantified. They learned that the real foundation of their billion-dollar enterprise wasn't data or software. It was a promise made in a rainy office in 1992. A promise I kept. My value wasn't gone just because they couldn't see it. It was just waiting, patiently, for the bill to come due. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of corporate karma, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories where the underdog comes out on top. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. I'll see you in the next video.